Right, recording. Okay. So, okay, everybody, we'll just come to our last speaker of today. And for our final speaker, we reach out a warm and friendly hand across the water to a man on a ridge overlooking the Pacific in Ocean Park, Washington, Mr. John Williams, whose book is called Lee Harvey Oswald, Lyndon Johnson, and the JFK Assassination. Now, I've got to be honest with you all, my knowledge of Lee Harvey Oswald is pretty much linked to the fact that he's an alleged lone nut that assassinated John F. Kennedy. And the details that I've mostly seen, and we've mostly seen, has been what happened to him leading up to and following his arrest. And my knowledge of Lee Harvey Oswald and his life before that is sketchy. Now, John's book explores this, explores his life. He's painting him as a real person rather than, as they say, a straw man concocted to match the image of a lone assassin. So among other facets of his life and personality, the book explores Oswald's relationships with Jack Ruby, David Ferry, and Judith Baker. So to tell us more about this, I'm going to hand you over to John Williams, and thanks a lot for joining us, John.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to start with just a little, I guess, ad. I went to the UK, Amazon UK website just to see if they had the book available. I was kind of shocked by what I saw because I was surprised. They had that book, it's available as a book or as a Kindle, but they also listed 3 other books by me. And of course, they're all statistics books, which kind of tells you what I did for my day job. I taught statistics at the University of North Dakota. And so that out of the way. What I'm going to do here, I'm not going to cover the whole book today.
Okay.
I'm just going to pick out some highlights that maybe just interest me. So in the book, I go through his life as a child. If you're, I am not a aficionado of John Armstrong, though I've read his book, and with Gary, we did some research together regarding what he wanted done, and none of which, by the way, panned out. But in any event, there is one little interesting detail when they talk about the 2 different mothers for Oswald. Well, we know about, or you've read about, maybe you haven't, his mother was Marguerite Oswald, and the father was Robert E. Lee Oswald. But Robert E. Lee Oswald had a previous wife whose name was Marguerite. That may be where the issue comes in. Well, there's the other issue that the mother wasn't what you would call the ideal mother. She put all of the kids up into the orphanage. Well, she put her 2 older children, and she tried to put in Lee Oswald, but he was only 2 years old, and they wouldn't take him at the orphanage. They had to be at least 3. And so she put the 2 boys in, the 2 older boys, and she also actually Lee went to the mother, rather to the wife of Margaret, the mother, her sister, who was married to Dutz Muret. And Dutz Muret was in the mafia. And Lee lived with her until he was 3 years old, and then he was put in the orphanage. And at the aunt of Oswald was very distraught about that occurring. Anyhow, going on in Oswald's life, I guess one of the next big more interesting things is that he and his mother moved to New York, and um, to that point, he'd had reasonably average to even better than average school marks. In New York, he became basically a truant, and in his truancy, he hitchhiked to Niagara Falls, which is probably 300 or 400 miles away, and he went to the person at the border and asked permission. He was 12 years old at the time. He asked permission to be able to walk around Toronto. He'd never been out of the country, he said. He'd like to just see what was there, and he promised to be back. And the guy allowed him. And that person's name was something Young, because he plays a role immediately in Oswald's life in I believe it was 53, and also he played a role in 1963, and you may have heard of that. But in 1953, he went to New York, had lunch with Oswald, and was trying to help him with the issues he had. The school was trying to, well, they put him actually in a house because of his truancy. And eventually, to get out of the problems, they moved back to New Orleans. And now we get into some interesting things. A lot of what happened after that is kind of like, this didn't fit the right description of a legend, so we had to get rid of that. Well, he when he got to New Orleans, among other things, he got involved in the Civil Air Patrol, and his lead person was look it up. All right. Well, I would remember if I was talking.
Take your time, John. It's fine.
I didn't put much in here about that. Okay. Well, all right. Tongues up flavor. I just noticed I did not put this in my this paper. Oh, another thing before I continue. I put this paper. It's available at a place called, it's my name, John Delane Williams, all together, no spaces, dot blogspot, that's blogspot.com. And that is I just put that on the internet earlier, rather last week. And now what I'm going to do is I've gone through it and I need to edit it some more. Within a week, I will put a more updated version there as well. And after I get it updated, you could also email me and I will send a copy of it. When I give presentations, I prefer people actually have a copy of the presentation so they can ask questions. And I couldn't do that. So my email address is john.williams@UND, that's UND dot ED. Oh, I left out something. After the John Williams, after the @ there's the word email, EMAIL, dot UND dot EDU. And if you send an email to me, probably by next week, I will send you the revised copy. So
Thanks a lot. I've just put your link to your blog and the email address in the chat area.
Very good. Okay.
As well as a link to the Amazon site for your book as well, John.
Okay, very good. I'm surprised I can't remember the guy's name. Let's see. David Ferry. It took me that long to remember. He's the fellow that was the CAP patrol leader that Oswald was in. Oh, by the way, I missed a very important detail. When he was a child, when they moved to Dallas, Moret, the guy who works in the mafia, called Jack Ruby and told Jack Ruby that he was to look over, make sure that things were going okay with Lee Harvey Oswald. And that happened when Oswald was like 4 or 5 years old. And Ruby knew Oswald through his life since that time. And as you know, the Warren Report tried to imply that there was no prior relationship, when in fact, all of Oswald's life, there was a relationship. So we have that Warren Report to always talk about. Okay. Anyway, when Oswald was in high school, it's kind of funny in a way. They went back to the Dallas area, and he actually went out for football. And they asked them to run some wind sprints, which is usually a distance of about 20 yards, and they're supposed to run as fast as they can. And he said, "I'm not going to do it." And they said, "Well, if you can't do it, you can't play on the team." He says, "I'm not going to run the wind sprints." And so they said, "Turn in your uniform." That was the end of his football career. He turned 17 on, I believe his birthday was October 24th or something like that. And several days after his 17th birthday, he joined the Marines. In the Marines, now this is rather interesting. He was not the flub up you hear about, but he actually went to several different training programs. He was training to be a radar air control person, and actually he did extremely well in his courses. In a course called Aircraft Control and Warning Operation, he finished 7th out of 30 trainees. And he was probably the only one of the group who did not have a high school diploma. And so he had obviously some decent native intelligence. And because he did as well as he did, he was sent to Asuji in Japan, which was a base. And this particular base was in control of U-2 flights, which became more famous when his name is Powers, flew over Russia and was shot down. Anyway, while in the Marines at the Atsugi base, Oswald went to a place called the Queen Bee, and he met a nice little lady there, whom he would eventually fall in love with, but he also met Richard Case Nagel, and we don't have specifically that this happened that way, but most likely that is where he was recruited to go to Russia. Nagel was, by the way, the base at Tsuji was also mainly a CIA base, and Nagel was in the Marines, but more likely was involved with the CIA at the time. And so, by the way, this girl that she was what we would call a bar girl, and they dates, as they call them, cost from $60 to $100 per time, and Oswald made $85 a month, and she was pumping him for information, so he reported this to his commanding officer, who said that he should see her some more and pump her false information. And so this went on for several months. Eventually, Oswald was moved. They put him to another station for a while, and one of the sergeants who was staying at Tsuji became involved with the same person, and Oswald got very upset with him, and he poured beer all over him, I think, and that got him into a lot of trouble. And then he was sent eventually back home. Now the next phase of his life, when he went to Russia, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you've read, but the person he knew best in Russia was a fellow named Ernst Titovitz, who was actually his best friend. Now, Ernst, at the time that he met Oswald, was a medical student in Russia, or actually in one of the, it's now called, okay, I'll find that out. I should look at the book. It's Minsk is the capital. Belarus, I believe. Belarus, I guess you say it. And one of the things that struck me in reading the book is that John Armstrong had said that Oswald would never have spoken a word of Russian in Russia. And the funny thing is, when he got to Russia, I guess he could speak Russian in the United States to other people who'd studied Russian in the United States, which means he couldn't speak to a Russian. It means he could speak to other students. And he realized that he was really way down in terms of his native Russian speaking, and just a starter. So the Russian government gave him some teachers to teach him Russian. Now, this kind of goes a very different direction. They weren't very good, but they were members of the Communist Party, and they had to do things like that. Well, he, through time and lots of experience, he eventually got to where he could speak Russian. And Titovitz said that he'd prefer to speak English with Oswald because he wanted to improve his English. But if they were with a group of people that the other people spoke only Russian, everybody spoke Russian, meaning Oswald as well. So that hypothesis that Armstrong had, I was pretty sure was laid to waste. And I became a non-believer in Armstrong. On the other hand, he has done some interesting research. His hypothesis, I think, is what's wrong. And I kind of know how it probably came about. Armstrong was a wealthy guy, and he got a lot of hangers-on. And I think the hangers-on would feed to him information that he would enjoy and he liked. And they got this one gal to say, no, he never spoke Russian around me. I don't think he spoke Russian. Well, she was slightly younger than Oswald and really wanted him to date her. And her father had already told him, as long as you're in my house, you're never to speak English. I will translate everything for you. So that's why he didn't speak Russian there. He was told not to by the father, who was pretty, he was in charge of what went on in the house, let's say. Then Oswald, a very important thing, I think, was Oswald fell in love with a young girl. She happened to be Jewish. Her name was, her last name was German. And let me see.
Ella German.
Yeah, Ella German. And they had gone, they'd done walks and gone to opera and movies and things. And eventually Oswald proposed to her. And she thought about it. She said, it would be too difficult because you're not German and you're from the United States. There would always be problems. So we can't do that. And that was like, I think, the 31st of December or the 1st of January. And about 3 or 4 days later, he applied to go back to the United States. This was in 1961. And having done that, he was no longer considered eligible to be a Soviet citizen. And so he basically made up his mind, I'm going back. After that, it was on actually March 17th, which is also St. Patrick's Day, which I don't think they celebrate in Russia. He went to a presentation and to a dance, and he met Marina. And she was surrounded by a bunch of males who, in Titovic's view, was other males who'd already had relations with Marina. And so he tried to edge his way in, which he was successful at. And 6 weeks later, they were married. So, and from that point, they did have a daughter in Russia, and they came back to the United States on the 12th of June in 1962. After coming back, they moved directly to Dallas. Among other things, he worked at a place called Jaggers Style Stovall. And this is in the summer of 1962 at Jaggers Style Stovall. One of the things they did was they published maps of Cuba. And the interesting thing, of course, is in October of that same year was when the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred. A thing about that, which I didn't know until a conference that Gary Severson and I went to, but that actually, most of those missiles were functional at the time of the crisis. And I think about 2/3 or 3/4 of them were functional then. And if there would have been an incident, we could have been bombarded with missiles. And uh, given that the military and the CIA wanted us to actually go in and bomb the missile sites, we would have started World War III. And of course, Russia would, since they were Russian missiles, they would have had to come to Russia to Cuba's defense, and that would have been, many of us would be toast today. Um, so, um, also in when he was in Dallas, he became friends with George de Mohrenschildt, and de Mohrenschildt, I may not say that anywhere near correct, was one of the major people in the Russian community in Dallas, and it was to introduce the Oswalds to other Russian-speaking people, and to kind of greet Marina. And so, anyway, Oswald returned to New Orleans in April of 1963. And then in April, actually on April 26th, he went to the post office and was behind this young woman who dropped her newspaper. He picked it up and she thanked him in Russian. And so he told her in Russian, "You're welcome. It's dangerous to speak Russian in New Orleans." He said that in Russian. And that person was Judith, her name then was Judith Very, and shortly thereafter she became Judith Very Baker. And they met and they talked, and she said that she was in New Orleans to work with Dr. Sherman, who was a cancer researcher, and he mistook that to mean that she was there to work on a project which Dr. Sherman was involved in, and it was a project to kill Castro with a developed cancer cells. And they were in the process of developing the cancer cells. And he thought, well, they brought her in to help. And so, which was not the case, by the way. But he took her to see David Ferry and also Dr. Sherman. And they discussed at some length what was going on. And then she found out that's not what you were coming here to do. You're to come here to have an internship with Dr. Sherman and then begin medical school at the University of Tulane. And but by that time, she knew a lot. And Dr. Sherman showed her under the microscope how the cancer cells actually operated. And it was an extremely fast-acting cancers that they were dealing with. And they needed to get that even more dangerous so that they would be able to be sure to kill Castro. And so that's what they were doing. Now, she was, they also had cover jobs at the Riley coffee plant. Oswald did almost nothing there. Occasionally he would help pack, but it was a place he would go and then go next door to where they had the magazines. And it was a kind of an auto shop. I think they fixed cars, but they also ran a place to park your car thing there, and they worked with the government, which included both the FBI and the CIA, and they had fleets of cars that were stationed there. And so during the week, Judith would work as a secretary for the person who was I believe he was a vice president or president of Riley. He was also involved in intelligence work. And Oswald's job, now actually, he worked for both the CIA and the FBI, so he had things to do. And but within the project, which was a CIA operation, he would be a courier. He would take specimens from one place to another and take them to another place when there would be different things done with the various specimens. They were rats that they were infected with cancer, and then they would take some organs out that were seen to be cancerous, put them into a blender and get these so it became a stronger concentration, then feed them to other rats or put them in an injection to other rats. And they would do this generation after generation, and they were trying to build as strong a cancer injection as they could get. And the more important job Oswald had was when it was finally developed, he was to take the developed cancer cells, go to Mexico and deliver it to a person at a particular store in Mexico. It actually happened after March, it would have been about, September 23rd or so. No, it was August 23rd. September 23rd, I'll get it, yeah. Before that, he'd gone to Mexico City in July or August, probably July, and met again with Richard Case Nagel. And they were, I don't know the entirety of their conversation, nor does anyone, but they did go out in the prairie, and they decided to shoot at cactus. And Nagel said Oswald couldn't even hit the cactus. He said it was like he couldn't hit the side of a barn. So there we go with his marksmanship. But Nagel met with Oswald again. I think was trying to determine. Oh, they met earlier, or in late August. There were 4 people who met, and it's reported as being Houston, except that it wasn't Houston. That's what Nagel said. It was somewhere else. And he didn't say where. But there were 4 of them, and they talked about the assassination of JFK. And then in the 17th of September, I think from the 15th to 17th, Nagel went to New Orleans to see Oswald, and Oswald had, my assumption is, he showed him what he was doing. And because, you see, Nagel's job given to him by the KGB was to kill Oswald. And but from Nigel's point of view, I will not kill him in the United States because that is a different form of. I won't be prosecuted in the United States if I do it outside the United States. So he wouldn't do it in the United States. But he determined from his meeting with Oswald in New Orleans that what Oswald was doing was for the good of the country and surely not a reason to kill him. And so after seeing Oswald, he went to El Paso, Texas, and he wrote 3 letters, two of them to people in the CIA, and the third was to Oswald. He sent Oswald airline tickets to Mexico City and $500 to be used for his expenses. Well, as you can probably guess, Oswald's mail was being opened, and Oswald never got the money or the tickets. But then on the 20th of September 1963, Nigel walked into a bank, shot 2 shots into the ceiling, and then walked out of the bank and sat in his car waiting for them to pick him up. He thought, since he didn't threaten anybody, didn't try to get any money, that he would be charged with a misdemeanor. But of course, to go into a bank and shoot it up is actually a felony. And so he sat in the car and waited for them to pick him up, and they did. And his reason for doing that, which he never told anyone at the time, was he wanted to be in prison just in case during that time JFK was killed. And he wanted nothing to do with killing Oswald. Whether Oswald had anything to do with it or not, he wasn't going to do it. And now this is where actually Gary might want to come in, and because it was Gary's point of view that it may very well be the reason that Nigel was shooting up the bank to not be anywhere but in jail was because Gary, and I might not be quoting him correct, was thinking that that the assassination could very well occur between the 23rd and 27th of September on JFK's conservation tour of the West. And if there was a plan to do that, it didn't happen. Well, we have.
You want me to say something, John?
You go right ahead.
Well, he told Russell, Nigel told Russell that his cover had been blown as he was about to leave El Paso and head for Mexico City. And his cover was blown to the extent that he had to assume it was because he lost contact with his handler. And he started to think he was getting framed, so he better get out. So he knew from the meeting in New Orleans in August that an assassination attempt was planned for the end of September. And here it is the 20th when he's crossing the border in El Paso, and he says, well, if it's going to happen in the next 5, 6, 7 days, I better be in jail. I've got to derail this plot. So most of the time, the account is related to the November 22nd attempt or Chicago in October. And for some reason, people overlook that Nigel told Russell that it was the end of September. Well, of course, my story is that I was there on September 25th and accidentally breached security, and there's this the story that we recorded here that fleshes that out. So I think the end of September is more likely on the radar of Nagel than November, because if he thought it was going to be a misdemeanor, he wouldn't be in jail in November. And he as a misdemeanor, he figured, well, maybe I'll still be in custody on the 25th, 6th, 7th, 5 days later. Anyway, leave it at that.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah.
I left out a fairly important thing. I don't know why, but in New Orleans earlier that summer, Jack Ruby would show up on several different occasions, and in his going to there and talking to both Oswald and to Judith, he found out about this project they were working on. The reason he found out is that he was funding it himself as well. And he knew they were developing this cancer bio weapon to kill Castro. And of course, he knew all about that particular project. Well, if we fast forward to several years later, when he was convicted of killing Oswald and had that overturned, before they would let him loose, they had injected him, and he was pretty sure it was with cancer cells. And in fact, he died within a month. So that's yet another little part of explaining a lot of things, I think. And I have some just other little tidbits that may be of interest. Let me just get to them. One of which is Oswald did have a driver's license. It was a Texas driver's license. And he had it with him in New Orleans. And he said, particularly if you were in Texas, he wouldn't drive, and he didn't want to be picked up with somebody who's called a communist. They would, if he had a bad taillight, he'd end up with some much worse charge. So he wouldn't use it in Texas. On Ferry's missing library card, in fact, Judith had it, and she just forgot she had it until it was when they were looking for it, and Ferry told her in a telephone call, just destroy it. We don't want it known anywhere. Also, Oswald gave a lecture on communism at Spring Hill College. He was driven there by Dutz Moret, who was his uncle, and his cousin was a student there. Now, basically, this says Oswald was their relative. It wasn't some guy from Russia or from some Soviet state. This was Oswald. I don't think they would have been inviting to some person who was claiming to be Oswald. There was an anti-Castro training camp for Cubans in just outside of New Orleans. Oswald was involved with that as well. In fact, they did a film there. But then he also told the FBI, and the place was raided. And he was able to get another person to be the person. He actually spread a rumor that the other guy did the information leaking. And the passport he got on June 24th to go to Mexico, with stops in Russia and other places, was he got that in one day. The person who was the agent was Arthur Young, and anybody who applied on June 24th got their passports the next day. Well, if you apply for a passport today, if you get it before 6 weeks, you're really lucky. And even back then, it would take weeks. So that's a little suspect too. Okay. One of the other things, and we get to the point of the assassination. And what was Oswald doing during the assassination? Well, up until about 11:45 that morning, he was up on the 6th floor. From 11:45, let me see if I can get he was, just jump over to that. At 11:45, he was on his work assignment. Then at 11:50, a fellow employee reported that he was in the domino room on the 1st floor reading a newspaper. Bill Shelley saw Oswald shortly before noon. Another employee, Eddie Piper, talked to Oswald at 12 noon on the 1st floor. And Oswald apparently went to the 2nd floor and purchased a soda, returned to the 1st floor, and was eating lunch. Another employee, Harold Newman, was eating his lunch at the same time. Carolyn Arnold, the secretary at the school book depository, observed Oswald in the domino room at 12:15. And they were there, both of them, until 12:25. At the time of the assassination, Oswald was getting change in the office of the secretary, Geraldine Reed. I got that from, that's in the book. The fellow who wrote, he did all the photography work. He and
Groden.
Who was that?
Robert Groden.
Robert Groden, yeah. He and Gary and I were on a panel together in 2018 in Dallas. And now we also have the reports that we've heard about that Oswald might have been the person in the doorway, or he might have been, I forget what they called him, something man.
Rahman.
Yeah. And now, was it possible that he could have been two of the three of those things? Well, I don't think he could be the two different people that are on the seeing the parade go by, the motorcade. But the where he's back further away, I don't have a time when that was taken. Does anyone else? He was called a prayer man. Yeah. And I believe there was a presentation on that here at the Dealey Plaza group that I saw last summer. And if, for example, it was either shortly before or after, he could very well have walked to the secretary's office right afterwards or right before. So the fact that he talked to a secretary or getting money from a secretary at 12:30, would not negate him being present either before that or after that, but probably in the paramount position. Okay. There are several other nominees. I want to get to a little bit about JFK. I'm not JFK. LBJ. At the time of the assassination, well, the night before the assassination, he told Madeline Brown that I try to find exactly what he said.
The Kennedys aren't going to annoy me any further, and
Go ahead.
yeah, and after tomorrow or something.
Yeah, he said something of the sort that after tomorrow, those goddamn bastards are not ever going to bother me again.
Supposedly.
That's a not exact quote, but that's close
Yeah.
to it. Then during the assassination, when they turned the corner, and before any shots rang out, he ducked, got down on the floor, and the Secret Service agent got on top of him when the shots rang out. So
He was supposedly
he kind of knew.
Youngblood, I think, had a radio, and
Yeah.
they were both listening to the radio.
Right.
Although guy that was in the car with him couldn't tell what they were listening to. It was very low.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened. There was no Youngblood didn't jump over the seat and sit on LBJ as LBJ claimed.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's some degree of premeditation, I would have to say. Now, what was LBJ's status? What did he have to do in terms of the assassination itself? My view is LBJ was not a person to keep things quiet. In other words, they couldn't trust the guy with more than what they had to know. In his case, his real part of the assassination was its cover-up, and the best part of that cover-up was the appointing of the Warren Commission to essentially convict Oswald and get rid of suspicion of the actual assassins and conspirators. So actually, the first JFK conspiracy was the Warren Commission, or the first one that we know about for sure. And I'm leaving out lots of things. Oh, there's a 3-wallet thing that day. Oswald left a wallet for Marina. Then another wallet showed up at the site of the killing of Tippit. And the likelihood was, and Oswald had a wallet on him. And I can't imagine Oswald owning 3 wallets, much less leaving one at the, I think that was a drop.
Yeah.
And I was at a meeting, and this fellow the guy who died several years ago, he ran one of the conferences, and he had asked a policeman, well, was there a drop involved here? And the guy said, well, maybe. Yeah, all right. Well, I want to get on to LBJ. Some of the stuff, as I read various things about LBJ, I lived through that period, and I guess it was long and I wasn't paying that much attention. LBJ did a whole lot of things positively for civil rights. And he did a whole lot of things positively for lower income people. And in some ways, second perhaps to Roosevelt, he had done a very good job of doing that. Now, there's just 2 little bad things. One of them is called the War in Vietnam, which got its big head start with the Bay of Tonkin resolution, which was taken advantage of as being the reason to get us more involved in Vietnam. And to the best of anyone's knowledge, the shots that hit the ship in the Bay of Gulf of Tonkin were probably friendly fire. And that was used as a means to get our involvement in Vietnam to a level that eventually would be to our downfall. Well, the war in Vietnam was one. There was one that was maybe even more heinous than that. I don't know if you've read about it, heard about it. The Liberty incident.
Yeah.
It was a boat that
Israel.
it went from the west coast of Africa, and it was on its way to Israel. It got there kind of late. It was supposed to get there in time for the 6-day war in June, and it didn't get there till June 4th, at which time it was the Israeli pilots flew over, and the Americans and Israeli waved at each other. And then shortly thereafter, they were attacked by another set of airplanes and by torpedoes. The torpedoes were the only things that caused damage, and several sailors were killed. The response of the American Air Force was to come to the aid of the stricken ship, and as they were approaching, and they were going to fire on the other airplanes, they were told to stand down and return to base, and they didn't like that, but they were supposedly told that either by LBJ or LBJ's people that were relaying the information. And then the boat, they were moving back to, they were going to go to Crete. They got to Crete, and they were told that they could not dock there. They were still waiting for it to sink, and they were keeping the ship afloat. And they eventually got to Malta, and there they docked. The 6-day war was over. Our intent was, if the Soviets intervened, we were going to nuke them. Now imagine, again, we have the Third World War. Only this one was deadly if it were ever to occur. But the concern was, we have a great excess in compared to the Soviets of nuclear warheads at this point, and we can get rid of them before they get rid of us. Wonderful thinking. Anyway, they got to Malta, and before they would talk to anyone, a guy came aboard and said something to the effect, "You are never, as long as you live, ever to say a word of this to any person, not anywhere, not even your wife, because if you do, death for you would be the simplest thing, and you might not get it. You might get something worse." Well, you'd think maybe that would have been successful, but somehow there are over 200 websites about the Liberty incident, and there have been many books written about it. And actually, I wrote about this in an article about 5 or 6 years ago in the Dealey Plaza Echo. So I think I'd like to, we've used up a lot of time here. I'd like to move to any questions anyone has.
That's great. Thanks a lot, John. So I'm going to open up the floor. Has anybody got anything they want to ask?
John.
Yes.
Hi there. I've got a couple of questions. Question one: have you read the book by Dr. Walt Brown regarding Judith Vary Baker?
What's the name of it?
It's called, I've got it here in fact, it's called Judith Vary Baker in her own
Oh
words.
yes, oh yes, yes I have.
Walt's a friend of mine. I speak to him quite a lot. So.
Well, actually, I used to speak to Walt a lot myself.
Guy, he's a great guy. In fact, gives me a lot of time. So.
Yeah. Well, we had areas of disagreement, and he basically stopped talking to me. But yeah, that's. Have you read his chronicles at all?
I've got it right there. The JFK chronology. I've got every copy of Walt's books. I've also got the first copy he ever published on the People versus Lee Harvey Oswald.
I have most of those myself.
Yeah.
Probably in some ways, his chronology is very useful. But if you read it, it's written by, it does not impress you. It was written by a historian. It was written by somebody who's writing about that time coming from God knows when. It goes way back. I would be of the opinion that Walt got involved. He set some things in his mind that became baked, and he doesn't really address. But that's not unusual. A lot of people, when they have written about something, they become fixed on what they wrote, and well, we had some good conversations, but the area where we really disagreed was on Judith Baker. Now, Judith, in my opinion, is truthful, but much of what she writes about is stuff that she's been told. And the people who talk to her may not have been truthful. But she's, on her own, is truthful. But perhaps all she's being true about is what she believes someone told her and she found to be reasonable. But that would be true of a lot of us. We're told something by someone, and well, this is what they told us, and yeah, I've read that all the way through, and I thought this is not a good way to spend your time, Walt. And I didn't say that.
I've also read it. I think Walt brings up a lot of good points in it, and one of them being how Judith and Lee supposed to have met. I just can't buy. Unfortunately, I just can't buy somebody going around the South in New Orleans in 1963 speaking Russian to a stranger. I just can't. I just can't buy that kind of thing. But listen,
have you known any 19-year-old girls?
Well, when I was 19, yeah.
Okay, now would you have spoken Russian if you knew it?
No. It's like, I suppose it's like me going around, I don't know, I suppose like back then, I mean, America and Russia were enemies, you know, and the cold communism thing, I mean, even if you had leftist or socialist literature, you would be blacklisted. So to be speaking Russian in the South, it just doesn't ring true to me. That's just my opinion.
Well,
It's kind of
first of all,
like, I suppose it's kind of like, I don't know how you really equate it, but it's like, to speak Russian, you would, in the 1960s in America or the 50s, I don't know, it was the 60s, but you would automatically be seen as some sort of communist. So I just don't. It doesn't ring true to me.
Okay, the United States is a little different than if you go to places like LA or San Francisco, there are 50 to 75 languages spoken in those cities. And some people don't speak any English at all. And if you get in, I went to a Japanese town in San Francisco, and everything was in Japanese. Now, I don't know what in New Orleans, which, by the way, though it's in the South, is a very unusual southern city, much more cosmopolitan than, let's say, places like Miami or Miami's a Cuban town, by the way, these days. So you can get away with speaking Spanish because you just be figured you're a Cuban. I don't know about, but I would say that young people will tend to do things you wouldn't believe. And Oswald never got older than 24, by the way. That was it. He was always a young person. And so it was probably unusual, but, and she said she did that as a kind of icebreaker. If people say, "What are you talking?" And then she would say, "Well, I'm speaking Russian. Don't you speak Russian?" And of course, most people say, "No." But that was her icebreaker when you meet somebody new. And I don't, it wasn't, as he told her, it is not smart to speak Russian in the United States or New Orleans. But for example, Walt says that Russian is, he tried to learn Russian himself,
Yeah.
and he had a lot of difficulty. But here's the thing. Some people, I'm better at learning languages than a lot of other people. And I've learned, I learned Spanish when I was 4, and I spoke it actually. And that was because my mother ran a store and we had a lot of Mexican nationals. And I was 4 and I could pick up the language quite well. It was easy. But I learned French. And I can, to this day, I'll say things in French if somebody teased me off. Then I say, "Pa." But I learned Norwegian. And I learned that when I was in my 50s. Well, he just thought it was not possible for someone to learn things that quickly. And I look at the Cyrillic alphabet, and I've never tried to learn Russian, but I don't think I would be just out in the. I might not learn to speak it, but I could learn to read it and understand it.
It's a notoriously difficult language. I think it's top 3, in fact, one of the most difficult languages to actually learn to speak and read. I think Mandarin's up there as well. So yeah, it's a very difficult language to try and learn.
Yeah, but I would think any Arabic language would be very difficult.
I think that's up there as well, I think.
Yeah. And I think that Greek and Russian would be on the same par. Okay, reading here. So yeah, it's okay to disagree with someone.
Oh, of course it is. Dissent is what makes it a subject worth discussing,
Right. In the U.S. today, some people think it's not right to disagree with Trump, and to them I call them I have words I won't say.
No, I think to have